Hey everybody, and welcome to the Tonic Accord podcast. I'm Alex Kapitko, joined by my friend and co-host Drew Nepley. Today I'm super excited because we have Mitchell Rosenberg joining us on the podcast. Mitchell is a fellow Chapman alumni. He graduated just last year, and he's gone on to work on the legislative affairs team for Governor Gavin Newsom in California. Before that, he worked on campaigns for Hillary Clinton and Cory Booker, and also recently launched his new platform, which is called Simplified, and it wants to help people engage more with politics. So Mitchell, thanks for coming on. How's your day going?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. So far, so good in sunny California, stuck inside.
Sounds like the norm.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's a bummer because I've mentioned this to Alex before too, is at the beginning of the whole shutdown, it was like rainy and cold, so it was a lot easier to stay inside. But now in California, it's 75 and sunny. Oh, it just looks so appetizing outside, but got to stay in.
California, New York, Atlanta, you're starting to see these pictures go viral of parks filling up. I mean, we saw the beaches, in California last weekend with thousands of people prompting the governor to shut them down. And so people are getting bored of staying inside. Well,
and you work in legislative affairs for Gavin Newsom. Do you have, you have a little bit of insight? What's going on up there as far as their response? I mean, I've heard about Orange County being kind of defiant against Gavin Newsom's orders, even lawsuits starting. Do you hear a lot about that? Like, what's the mood in Sacramento as far as the kind of the resentment towards these lockdowns?
Yeah, I mean, look, so, and I'll be clear, I'm speaking on behalf of myself and, not the office at all. But, I think you're definitely right that there's resentment growing. And I think that comes from the people, who really care a lot about local control. And this is an interesting kind of political experiment when you think about the branches of government, because governors right now are kind of, being thrown all the power. So imagine all the legislators sitting at home, not totally sure what to fill their time with. They passed some bills, $1 billion, for example, in the beginning for COVID, granting the governor kind of, a lot of leeway on that. With this recent example, thousands and thousands of people went to the beaches last weekend because it was nice outside. And, the governor's response was, we wanted to give you control. We wanted to give the locals control, but look, it's not working. So, shut down the beaches in Orange County, and some individual, city council members in Huntington Beach, some other cities are suing the governor for it and for that order. Do I think that's going to go anywhere? No, because we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and that's how it spreads. But so I think there's definitely heightened observation being paid up here to what's happening across the state, especially on the coasts and in congregate living settings, mainly where there are, lots of people, especially lots of people voluntarily going to a place, and more cities, counties are saying, we're going to start enforcing. If there's a house party, we're going to cite you, we're going to arrest you, etc. And we don't want to turn into a police state, but at the same time, you need people to stay home.
Definitely. Yeah, that's really tough, and I've been thinking about this for a while. Do you think there is a middle ground between complete lockdowns and just kind of allowing localities to do what they want? Because it seems like every time either like state governments or federal governments give, the localities the ability to make decisions, they seem to kind of be careless to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think it throws back to what you guys talked about in your last episode about, how partisan this issue has become. And of course, city councils are quote unquote nonpartisan, but they're not. Right. And, yes, a lot of the issues they deal with may be like, fixing the roads, but they're not nonpartisan. I mean, where we went to in Chapman, that Orange City Council is as conservative as the city council can be. And when you throw it to localities with an issue like this that has become so partisan, you can't necessarily trust that they're going to follow the advice of local public health officials. So I think there's a balance you can strike. And I think we did do that really well for the first several weeks. I mean, this feels like it's been going on for years, but the first month, for example, we really did want to give leeway to the localities. But COVID is not following county borders or city borders, so doing that also, of course, raises another risk of we'll try this, but people are going to jump around. It's going to spread easily and just continue.
Right. Now, I do know that the response with COVID and everything, and the fact that we mentioned how governors are perhaps more in the news now than usually. A lot of people are looking at maybe governors for, VP positions for Joe Biden, or perhaps longer term career goals, potential 2024, 2028 presidential bids. Do you kind of see any governors, maybe Newsom, or even mayors like Garcetti in LA? Do you kind of see any of them preparing to perhaps use this time to become a leader and propel their political careers?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I mean, I'll start with the VP slot. The governor that's been talked about most for the VP slot is Gretchen Whitmer,
Right.
And this is just, it's not a time to pull a governor out right now for a campaign. I mean, the governor is the person, especially in a state like Michigan that's really struggling. You can't just pluck that person out and say you're now running for office. So I think, in my non-expertise, I debunk that claim. That, I mean, she's great and I think she's doing a good job. Obviously, she's getting flack and people with guns chasing after her in the Capitol, but so I don't think that. I mean, I think it's no secret that Eric Garcetti and also that Gavin Newsom have had presidential interests. They'll both say I'm focusing on my job right now, and of course they are. But I think this pandemic is going to change it all, because people are going to look, they look to disasters. So they're going to look to this pandemic, see how you were as a leader. Garcetti's getting high marks, Newsom's getting high marks. So are a lot of other governors, versus other governors getting really low marks, and how they're dealing with it. So I think that it's going to be inevitable that this is used as an example in future campaigns for the next, several decades, because this will be talked about, forever. It'll be in the history books, of how they handled it and how they could handle another one or a different kind of disaster. So I definitely think it'll play a part.
I also think it's interesting how, I think this whole pandemic has reminded people how important your localities and state government is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in politics, obviously the show dog is the presidential, is the federal government. Everyone is super interested in that, political race and all that stuff. But oftentimes people forget about how important their localities really impact their lives. On the day-to-day, the government that's impacting you the most is your city, your state. And I think that for a lot of people, it's waking them up to the reality of, it actually matters more that I live in California versus another state than I live in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think you're absolutely right. I think, I think those of us, who talk about politics, study politics, of course, are the ones screaming from the rooftops that it matters, that
Right.
you vote locally and statewide. And, most people don't know who their assembly member or their state legislators are. But they do. I mean, I'll tell you from personal experience, if anyone's pessimistic about politics, move up to Sacramento and look how much gets done in California, because you have a supermajority of one party. But my point being that the work that these legislators are doing every single day, and governors, are truly what is impacting you on a day-to-day basis, less from the federal government. And that's, where that importance, I think, stems from. And like you're saying, especially is heightened during a global pandemic, when you're looking to your mayors and your county health officials, these local people that you never heard about, that you've never really, paid much attention to, are the ones that are calling the shots.
Right. Dr. Fauci went from never being heard of to now being played by Brad Pitt on SNL.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you said about, California having a supermajority. I'm from kind of a smaller town, and so there's a lot of conservatives where I'm from. And I hear that being almost sometimes a criticism, I guess you could say, where I think what Newsom and the Democrats have done have been very beneficial for large cities, large municipalities that need these large lockdowns, But how would you maybe step back, and because it's very clear, there's a rural urban divide that is growing in the United States. And I think a lot of these rural parts of a state that's controlled by a Democratic supermajority feel kind of ignored and almost forgotten. And how do you think that could maybe be addressed?
It's hard when you have a state like California that could be 6 states, right? Like, California is so unique in how diverse it is with communities, right? Rural, urban, suburban communities. So it's tough. And, because of who their representatives are. Now, I will say, California, yes, has a Democratic supermajority, but what I've seen in my experience, if a Republican has a good idea, people will get behind it. And, especially when you're looking at rural communities, we've done so much work during this pandemic to address the divide in rural communities in terms of education, in terms of internet access, because we're sending everybody home to do school, but tons of these kids don't have internet access, laptops, etc. So how do we address that divide? I do hope that the increased kind of visibility of rural communities during this and the disparities there will transcend this and will continue after this pandemic, to show that there are real needs that aren't being met there. There's issues with water, of course, in rural communities across the country, along with many other issues. I do think representation is tough. If they are represented by such a small minority in a legislature, I mean, anywhere, it's gonna be tougher to get your voice heard. And I mean, that's I guess how a democracy works, right? But I do hope that kind of more attention is paid to those communities moving forward.
Right.
Do you think the Democratic Party as a whole will kind of, I mean, you talk about California and the specifics of this pandemic and around Sacramento, but do you think kind of the Democratic Party as a whole will be able to address this increasing divide? Because I mean, I see it too. I mean, the term like coastal elitist is almost a household term now, and that just goes to show right there how kind of in our mentality there's this divide between coastal elite cities and the rural America. Do you think the future of the Democratic Party is trying to bridge that gap, and how would they do that?
I do, and I think it's because those issues are becoming, more and more highlighted every day. I think people are learning more of the issues there and the disparities there. Now, of course, it is no lie that there are politicians out there that are going to fight more for those who voted for them and less for the others. Sure. I mean, that's just, obvious. It doesn't mean that it's right. And, you often hear that I'm going to fight for you even if you voted for me or not line. But that's not always true. But I do think that the future of the Democratic Party includes really fighting for those that are struggling and struggling more and more through the disparities. I wish I had the magic answer. But I do think that moving forward, we can put a greater focus on those communities and others.
Yeah. Do you think there's a certain candidate you think would be best suited to do something like that?
A candidate in the future, like a presidential candidate?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, or just kind of any, like, do you see a person that's on the field, maybe an up and coming player that you think might have the ability to kind of bridge these gaps? I mean, if you don't, I mean, again, I'm putting you on the spot here. I don't want to.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's one specific person that jumps to mind, but I think that if you look at people who have dealt with issues like this, right? So use California again as an example, because there is a lot of rural community here, and you look at the state legislators or the governor that have, dealt with bills around this issue, or, during the pandemic, like really championed, getting greater internet access, broadband access to them. If you look at those kinds of people, I think that they're going to be the front runners in the terms of who understands these issues the most.
Right. My issue though is like, because I understand that disparity is an important issue, and I think that's something that both sides could come together on in rural areas and facing this, But my issue is that from everything from the Second Amendment to social issues to now these protests around the lockdowns, I think this rural-urban divide goes deeper, to just the true cultural divide. And I feel like both parties are going to have trouble going forward, because the Democratic Party seems to just be going one direction and the right is going the other direction, and it seems to me like it's going to be hard to reconcile that.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that too. Like the new left or the progressive left, I also find it hard. I imagine it's hard to connect people like AOC to the same people that are bringing guns to the Michigan Capitol Hill. To me, there's miles and miles of difference between these. And I think it would be hard to bridge that kind of gap.
Yeah, and I mean, you brought up the protests. I went on a run on Friday in Sacramento and forgot about the protests and ran right into it at the state capitol. Where there were 1,000 or more protesters, and it really, I mean, it was a stark. I had to stop and take a step back. You're looking at the police in riot gear, and of course they're doing this out of precaution because of what happened in Michigan. Right. But I think that looking at this, I think you're right that divide is growing, and unfortunately, it seems like it's going to continue to grow, and that a disaster like a pandemic that we hoped maybe could unify isn't doing that.
Do you think that? I mean, kind of let's get into the meat of what's going on right now with the election. Do you think Joe Biden is someone that's going to be able to kind of bridge that gap? Because I often hear, well, he can get those states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio that are more blue collar. He's from Scranton, PA. Do you think he can? Do you think he can kind of carry those blue collar workers that maybe Hillary couldn't?
I want to think that a leader who isn't divisive can do it. And you look at Trump, obviously, in many cases the definition of divisive, and that's kind of his goal. But when you look at a leader like Joe Biden, who isn't going to go out there and say these radical things about the other side or their beliefs, because he's just not. It doesn't seem to be in his character. He'll say that he disagrees, but he's not going to belittle them necessarily. I do hope that is what brings it together. I mean, it also makes me wonder, during this, I mean, look what happened in the UK. Boris Johnson before was basically like down with science and, we don't need to be doing this. And then went to the ICU and then came out and was like, listen to the scientists, they're right. And that was kind of a unifying moment for the UK in a way. Could we have something like that if these people protesting, whatever communities they're coming from, clearly they're not being hit very hard, or they're personally in their personal lives not being hit? And not that I wish anything upon any of them, of course, but the more personal connection you seem to have to COVID for these people, I think that might be a shift. And maybe with these leaders, if they can tap into that because there are these personal connections. I mean, look at all these politicians who have either them or their spouses, whatever were affected, their families affected. And I think that's going to become a common trait in this country, that everybody knows somebody that's been affected.
I think we talked about that one of our previous episodes, Alex, where it was like the communities that don't want lockdowns the most are the ones that are rural and less affected by COVID. But that's because, some projections think that those COVID will hit them in a couple months down the line. And so it's almost this counterproductive thing that Trump is supporting these protests in these areas where it's like, hey, man, these are your voters, actually. And in a couple months, they may be hit a lot harder than you expected. And might that come back to bite you? So, yeah, that's an interesting point, that as this pandemic continues to affect more and more people, because, again, we don't even know if we're at the peak. Some countries have peaked, some haven't. This might actually end up being a unifying moment, but for now, it certainly seems like it's been divisive, at least if you watch the news.
Right, and I mean, Trump is a short-term thinker, so not a long-term thinker. So in the short term, yes, that looks good for him, to his base, tweeting "Liberate Michigan," "Liberate Ohio," etc., rallying up these protests, being on their side, etc. I mean, there are good people on both sides. Like, go back to that in Charlotte, but. In Charlottesville, but he's a short-term thinker. He's not thinking long-term in the terms that, okay, let's send these people out, right? These 1,500 people at the state capitol yesterday. There's a good chance someone in there is infected and infected others, right? There's a good chance there's some spread there. And when it affects them, is it going to help them in the long run? When it hurts their family more, whether, someone gets sick, someone passes away, God forbid, and economic consequences that has on their family, he doesn't think long term. So none of us know, of course, but it will be interesting to see if what he's trying to do now pays off or hurts him.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a good point. And do you think it almost could come down to a game of timing? Because I feel like he's kind of pushed states like Georgia and Florida and other more Republican states, more rural states, to start opening up. And part of me worries, though, that if you don't want Trump to win, potentially if the pandemic doesn't hit these rural areas by November and their economies start, going on the up again, it could help him, at least in certain areas, maybe get a boost. And I mean, the Wall Street Journal reported that most people in Georgia have not gone out, even though the state is starting to open up. So do you think maybe he's taking a bet that could work? I mean, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. I honestly think that the economic impact of this is so beyond belief right now and understanding right now. I mean, California is going to have from having a huge surplus to a ginormous deficit, and states are going to move to strictly operational budgets only, meaning whatever they need to keep the lights on. None of these programs you hear about, nothing exciting, nothing innovative coming out of states. I think that, because they're not bringing in any revenue. And I think, and we've read things about the economy, quote unquote, booming, but they really, it's not going to be some quick, sudden boom, because there's going to be a loss of small businesses and there's going to be a loss of economic activity. And like you just said, people not wanting to go out. I don't see myself running to a bar the day that we're open or running to a concert the day that we're open. And I think there will be people who do. And then there's going to be other people, like me, who are saying, I'm going to give it some time. And that's obviously going to hurt. So I don't think that these communities are going to suddenly see a total turnaround by November and be like, okay, we're great, back to normal.
I mean, also, if you look at like market indicators, I mean, or actually the lack of market indicators, because, we have the most employment we've ever seen, like the highest spike in unemployment applications. And we don't even know if that's the real number because some of the websites are too blocked. And so we see that, and then yet stocks have been rising for the past month, but that's because of federal Fed money inflation. And then you have people like Warren Buffett saying he's just going to hold on to cash and not invest right now. It is so strange that I really have no idea where this economy is going to be going, and no one really has an idea if this is a 1-year recession or a 5-year recession or a blip on the map. It is certainly worrying times, though, as far as like the economy, and I do think I do personally think that this is kind of like a Donald Trump's Katrina. We've mentioned that before in this podcast, that this is his Katrina, that he kind of like he's messing up consistently, and I think it's going to hurt his legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I also worry, though, as well, because you have people like AOC who have come out now and said we should pay people to not work in the long term. And to me, there are also some worries with that, because if we're running on, a 80 or 90% economy for the next year or two, and you disincentivize people to go back to work, I feel like that's also not a good platform, and I'm afraid that there's such a divide, back to what we were talking about, that you have some politicians telling people, just don't go back to work, we're going to take care of this. And then the other half is saying, no, go to work now. We need to bring back workers. And I feel like both sides of the rhetoric are dangerous, especially if this could be a 2 or 3 year recession.
Right. I mean, I think we're going to see the workforce completely change, right? Like,
yeah.
Anywhere you go, I mean, my office, we're packed in like sardines. I don't think that that's going to be a sustainable, way of the future, especially as people, I think, through this are going to take greater stock of their own personal health and not want to put themselves in such risky situations potentially. By risky situations, I literally mean just a crowded place, which, of course, a few months ago wasn't even a thought. But I do think, what are we going to see? Are we going to see crowded offices being like half of the workers come in Monday, Wednesday, and the other half come in Tuesday, Thursday, and everyone work from home Friday or something? I think we're going to, I think we know we're going to see changes and to allow people to get back to work, but not in that same way. And then I think we're also going to see, I mean, those of us who have the luxury and the ability to work from home, we're very lucky. And I think that we're going to see a greater requests from workers saying, well, I want to work from home. If I can do the same job from home, why should I be coming into the office?
I know I certainly am. I've been working from home for like 6 weeks now, and I've definitely realized, maybe not every day, but I could totally do, 2 days in the office and 3 days out and still have the same productivity.
Right. What would be the alternative?
That's part of the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what do you guys think would be the alternative for people, say, that are working in meat processing plants, factory workers, essential employees, healthcare providers that clearly cannot take 2 days to stay at home a week, Right.
Oh, I wish I knew. I mean, I think those places will have to also look different. I mean, look what just happened, at the Tyson plant with 900 people, getting infected. So I think those are going to have to look different. But of course, it is a total ripple effect, like everything with this pandemic. Of, okay, well, then is output, lower, and the supply is lower while the demand, stays the same. And, that causes issues and potential inflation, but no one has money to spend. So I don't know. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I do think it's something that we're going to have to, start to think about early on. meaning yesterday, and kind of get ready to get into this, because I don't think there's no, I definitely don't think it's going to be this year that things are just totally back to normal like they were a few months ago.
No.
And maybe not even next year. So we got to think in the long term.
Well, certainly I think another thing that's changing because of this pandemic is messaging and the way people are getting messages in media. Now we've seen CNN town halls with Joe Biden in his living room. Everything's kind of changing as far as and how you message, right? You have even just basic advertisements like Walmart are saying, thank you heroes, stuff like that. Everyone is trying to change up the way they message and the media they use to try and hit people differently now, especially politically, right? We're going into we're going to be in the middle of a giant election, and people are going to still be staying at home and quarantined. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how should politicians change their media, their messaging? And then, of course, I want you to go into a little bit about what you're doing with kind of new political media with the Simplified platform.
Yeah, so, to start with the messaging, I think we've been pushing for so long, at least, the younger generations, for politicians to find new ways to connect with voters, to connect with constituents. And, a lot of it is still kind of old fashioned. Even, we're seeing that now with some older politicians. There's no video town hall right now. It's a call in line, and, everyone gets on the phone and, just listens, almost like a fireside chat, but a little less cool than that. But I think, Joe Biden's doing an okay job, but I think there's no reason that I shouldn't be seeing Joe Biden every single minute of every single day on every platform that I'm on, because they have the ability, and there were reports, he's getting like economic briefings during this, and he's kind of preparing to be president. And I think kind of what's more important right now is that he gets elected president, which means he should be doing local spots all over the place every day, because why not? He should be on my social media live streaming every day, because why not? And maybe he's not the best at it, and people are worried because he makes some gaffes here and there, of course, but him and other politicians don't really have an excuse right now to not be in my face. If people aren't watching, people aren't watching, but there's no harm in putting yourself out there, as long as you're, a little careful. Maybe don't go live, just film it and edit it and post it. But yeah, so in terms of Simplified, it goes in with that. It's my goal with this new platform, and we're on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and online, is really to start educating people who feel that politics are just way too complicated, who have stayed out of it, who don't vote because they say, well, I don't understand anything, or it's way too complicated, because we need those people to get involved. And the point of Simplified is to really just help people dip their toes into an issue. You hear about Medicare for all the time. You heard about it on the presidential debate stage. They talk about it for 45 minutes in a given debate, but what does it actually mean? And that's kind of what we're there to do in less than 90 seconds, give you the rundown. You're not going to become an expert in it, but you're going to dip your toes in, and maybe you're going to think, oh, that's kind of interesting, I want to learn more. Or it's enough to, be watching a debate the next time you hear, say Bernie Sanders a few months ago talking about it, and you say, oh, I know what that is. I understand that. And that's really our goal, to just help engage, more people with the political system so that they get out there and they vote.
That's awesome.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I think if you can go from people knowing 10% about something to even 50 or 60, you have a more educated base, and that's important. I like that a lot.
Well, and certainly we all know that even with how loud Twitter can be sometimes, it's still young people that are the least politically active. So any kind of platform to bring people into the political process and get engaged is definitely a good thing in my book.
Yeah, and our goal is to get those people that aren't going to go, read a really long article about a general political issue, or watch a 30-minute explainer video on Vox or something like that. How do we kind of get those people that aren't typically interested in politics, don't pay it much attention, to at least feel that they know something? They feel that they have some agency in the political system. We'll talk about simple things. How do you register to vote, right? Like, it might seem second nature to us, but it's not so obvious to everybody. And how do we get the message out there? And I think an important part about it is we're trying to stay as nonpartisan as possible. And I am a left guy, so it's tough. But what I really want to make sure we're doing is we're not alienating half the country after our first episode. They come to us for 5 seconds and they're like, I'm out. We're really trying to be in the middle, give the facts on both sides so that people feel that they can learn. and especially target those who just grow up believing what their parents believe, which is obviously really common. How do we kind of give you your own sense of knowledge and your own understanding of politics to then, choose your own route?
Certainly very interesting. I encourage our listeners to definitely go check it out. Let me get the exact Instagram link here. I have it up at Now Simplified. No spaces, spelled correctly. At Now Simplified on Instagram, and then of course you mentioned you have on other platforms as well, right? Twitter and Facebook.
Twitter and Facebook, yeah.
Definitely check that out, guys. Awesome, man. Yeah, it is a cool platform. I did notice how I watched the one on universal basic income, and you had the pros and the cons. I did really enjoy that little tidbit of that for sure.
Yeah, definitely the goal.
Interesting. I would feel bad if I didn't ask you, going back to the first part about messaging while we're here, about Joe Biden and his sexual allegations and the fact that it almost seems like messaging and getting new voters could be hard. Because I like what you're doing. I think it's really important. And I'm worried this might be a bad election to get new voters out, just like 2016 again, because you almost seem to have a divide inside of the party between the progressives, who want Biden held accountable, and kind of the establishment who just want him to be able to beat Trump. So do you think this could become another problem of messaging that could backfire on the Democrats again?
I mean, well, look, I think he has to be held accountable, and I think he's also saying I should be held accountable, but it's not true, and that's why he called. And of course, like, I am out there, I'm waiting, to get more details on this, waiting for reporters to vet it. And the New York Times vetted it, so far, and they haven't found. The report she filed. Joe Biden called on the National Archives to release any reports that were filed and information. So I don't want to rush to judgment, nor do I want anyone to rush to judgment. And I also, I definitely agree that he should be held accountable, regardless of party. I also agree the President of the United States should be held accountable. And I think that, of course, we're in a tough situation this far into the primary that people are saying, well, he's all we have left. So it doesn't matter. We just got to elect him. I think that that's not the best messaging. Although if that's how you might feel, I think we have to see, what the facts show.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I think Joe Biden's known as a pretty honest man, and so I think that's why when he says it's not true, I mean, there is something to that. But at the same time, I hear a lot of conservatives say, I mean, do you think Brett Kavanaugh would have been glad to receive the same treatment as Joe Biden? Because it does seem like there are similarities between these allegations, and I guess the hammer went down much harder, much earlier on with Kavanaugh.
Yeah. I mean, right. I think that, you can point to all of these examples. You can point to Democrats and Republicans,
right.
With allegations along the way. I thought of Al Franken because, Kirsten Gillibrand came out and defended Joe Biden, which I was actually surprised she did so early on, given her role in it all. I think we're just going to have to see. But I think also what people have to look out for is misinformation, because there is misinformation spreading like wildfire on social media with new allegations that they, turn out Joe Biden wasn't even at this event that they claim, and there's things, and we have to be careful about this misinformation that's flying, because, misinformation campaigns, foreign entities, etc., are going to capitalize on things like this to try to make it worse. And I think we just have to wait and see, and also do our due diligence, and, have reporters do their due diligence.
That's definitely the dark cloud that people have kind of forgotten, is that there will be a ton of misinformation and disinformation campaigns that will happen again in 2020 that we all knew happened in 2016, and then we haven't really done too much to combat. It's going to come around to bite us again. Before we get out of here, I know we're getting kind of long on this episode, but before we get out of here, I did want to bring up the point you just mentioned about how a lot of people feel we kind of just ended up with Joe Biden. I'm personally kind of on that camp. I don't think he was the best candidate that we had available, but we've kind of ended up here. And I felt this has happened twice with the Democratic Party recently. Do you think that there should be some changes to maybe how the party runs its primaries to avoid having this problem where we kind of end up with a candidate instead of put the best foot forward? Or do you feel that maybe, this is the best foot forward and it's working as intended?
I think the democratic process, played itself out. So I'm not in that camp now. I want to say, I was a Booker guy and then I was a Warren guy. Fully in. I'm looking at the Warren poster on my wall right now. Like Joe Biden was not the top of my list. He wasn't in my top, probably 3 or 4 on my list. But you watch the incredible defeats. I mean, the incredible wins that he had in a lot of these states.
Sure.
And I think you can't, diminish that. I think that there are louder voices for other candidates, but there may have been more in numbers for him. Now, of course, look at someone who's been in politics their entire career, they're going to be a much more household name. A lot of people vote based on household names. Yeah. It's just the reality. And, so in that way, establishment might help. But he was struggling with money compared to other candidates. I don't think that he was some superpower until, later when he started doing well. And remember, he started doing well before he was picking up all those endorsements, from the prior candidates.
Right. But then at the same time, do you almost think that the Democratic establishment might need some reform? Because, in 2016, Trump took a wrecking ball to the right, to the GOP, and instead of kind of falling in order, I guess, behind a different candidate, they completely followed Trump. But now, for example, with Bernie, you've seen almost the opposite, where he kind of wanted to take a wrecking ball to what the DNC establishment was, and instead they pretty much rallied against him. Do you think maybe we are in a time where the DNC does need to change? Because voters, I don't know, the voters are more populist. Sorry.
No, I think you're right. I think the DNC is behind in its times. So yes, I think it needs reform. I think Trump was something no one ever expected, and he was bulldozing on the debate stages, and he was filling stadiums with tens of thousands of people. Now, of course, Bernie's the only Democrat who can do that, who was doing that as well. And I think almost Bernie's biggest mistake, which I don't actually fault him for, just quote unquote mistake, was running against Hillary Clinton, who everybody felt that it was her turn and she deserved it, and she'd be a good president. So. But I do think you're right. I do think the DNC needs a shakeup. Now, I don't know what that means. I mean, Pete Buttigieg ran for DNC chair before he ran for president. Would that have changed things? I don't think so. Maybe if AOC was chair, maybe someone like that, they could really shake things up. But, a lot of Democrats still are not the Bernie wing of the party. And, how do you maintain kind of a middle ground? Not sure.
Good point.
Right.
All right, right before we get out of here, quick rapid fire. Give me 3 names we should look out for in the DNC, up and comers you think that might be pretty influential or good candidates in the future.
Cory Booker. AOC, because of her star power and intelligence, and Gretchen Whitmer.
All right, those are rapid fire. Thank you so much, Mitchell. This was a great episode. We really loved having you on, and we certainly covered a wide breadth of topics that we could each have a 2-hour episode on. But yeah, thanks again for coming on. Is there anything you wanted to say before we head out?
No, I appreciate you guys having me. It was great, and I love your show.
Thanks, Mitchell.
We really appreciate it. Again, our listeners, Tonic Accord is on YouTube, Podbean. Find us on Facebook. Definitely check out Now Simplified on Instagram, Twitter. You said Facebook as well, right? Just want to make sure we're absolutely
Facebook as well.
Facebook as well. Please go check them out. And thanks again for listening.